Okay, so I think we're going to make a start. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is James Calcott. I'm a Schools and Colleges Liaison Officer at Royal Holloway. So I hope you can all see and hear me. I'm delivering the session today, so I'm going to be talking for about 15 or 20 minutes about personal statements and kind of giving you the detail about what personal statements are and a little bit more in depth about kind of how to write a good personal statement. We're then joined by two wonderful student ambassadors, Zara and Shaw, who will be able to give their take on writing personal statements and answer your questions as well about their experiences of writing personal statements. We're also joined by my wonderful colleague Amelia, who will be in the chat. So if you have any technical questions or any sort of logistical issues, please do just pop them in the chat, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment and let her know. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn my webcam off because it's slightly distracting looking at myself while I'm presenting, and then myself and the student ambassadors will put our webcams on at the end when we're doing the Q&A. So while I'm talking, think about a few questions and stuff, but I'll just turn my webcam off for now. There we go. So hopefully you can see my slides instead of my face. So we are just going to kind of test out the chat function. So you should all have access to the chat function down the right-hand side panel, and it should look a little bit like this. Basically, I just want you to just make sure that we're all kind of here and that you can use it and you know how to use it. If you could just type yes or no, whether or not you can hear me, that would be excellent. So very quickly, just a quick yes and no. Brilliant. So I'm seeing lots of yeses, which is very reassuring. It's good to make sure that I'm not just talking into the void and there are other people there. So perfect. Thank you very much, guys. That's all good. So you can all hear me and see my slides, which is excellent. So very briefly, a little bit about Royal Holloway. So we are a university just outside of London in Egham, in Surrey, and as you can see here on the map, this is where we're located. So just outside of London, and a picture of our campus as well. So we're sat on 135 acres of woodland, and you've got a list there on the left-hand side of the departments and the courses that we offer. I would encourage you, if you are interested in kind of what we offer, to find out a little bit more about us. You can take a look around our campus using our virtual experience. You can chat to current students as well as our students here today using our chat function. And we also have a personal statement review service as well. So that's a free service where you can get your personal statements reviewed by experts like myself and Amelia and other members of our team who will read through your personal statements and give you feedback. And I'll pop these links in the chat at the end and up on the board at the end as well. But as I said, we're going to talk about what a personal statement is, why it's important. We're then going to talk about what you should write about in your personal statement and kind of how to structure a personal statement as well. And as I said, at the end of that time, we can then hand over to you guys for questions to our ambassadors and myself. So I'm going to kind of go through these bit by bit. I said I'm going to aim to talk for maybe 15 or 20 minutes. I'm really keen to get your guys' perspectives and kind of what you would like to ask and kind of what you're thinking about. So I'm going to try not to take up too much time, but just kind of give you the core information that you need to know. And we're going to start with what a personal statement is. So what is a personal statement? Why are they important? Why do we have them? So a personal statement is like a reflected essay, basically outlining why you're the best candidate for your particular course. So it's your chance really to put across your passions, your interests, your experiences, your skills in a piece of writing in prose for a university to review and read. So for us as universities, it gives us an opportunity to get to know you, the person behind the grades, which is so important because without the personal statement, we wouldn't really know too much about you other than what your GCSEs are, what your predicted grades are, and we do want to know and make sure that you're going to thrive and contribute to our university community. As I've said already, it gives you a chance to really express kind of your knowledge, your skills, experiences, and kind of your general sort of passion for that chosen field as well. I should say there are strict limits on a personal statement, so 4,000 characters or 47 lines. So when I say or, I don't mean that you can choose either one. What I mean is you can't go over either 4,000 characters or 47 lines. So that's the limit. There's no kind of leeway over that. You can go under it, but no leeway over it. And you only get one personal statement for your 5 choices. So it's really important to make sure that you're not mentioning particular universities by name. So you don't want to start your personal statement with, I've always wanted to come to Royal Holloway, ... because you might annoy the other 4 universities you're applying to. And equally, you don't want to necessarily name courses by name as well. So that can be a bit challenging for applying for, say, different types of courses or different names, titled courses or whatever. So it's kind of keeping it relatively vague on that front. But as I said, you only get the one, so you only get one kind of opportunity to impress all 5 of your universities in kind of this one document. And I kind of touched on some of these points already, but why kind of a personal statement is important. So as I said, it lets us get to know you, the person behind the grades. It gives us an opportunity to get to know you as an individual, kind of not just as a person that's applying to university, but actually you, and again, what you can contribute, what you're going to bring to university and what you're going to aim to get out of it. It allows you to stand out from the crowd. So we've talked about demonstrating your skills and experiences and your thoughts, but it also allows you to stand out from the crowd as well. So lots of university courses will have lots of people applying for them. So it gives you a chance, as I said, to kind of show off about kind of the things that you do and your thoughts and the amazing things that you've done. And finally, it brings a bit of colour to your UCAS application as well. So the UCAS application is quite drab. I'll be honest with you, it's quite clinical. It's kind of a bit like a job application, online job application, where everything's kind of very, as I said, very clinical, very black and white, kind of, tick this box, put a grade in here, put a number in here, put years in here. Whereas the personal statement is a little bit more of an opportunity for you to kind of let your personality come into your application and really put across you as a person. And before you kind of get started kind of on that process of planning and writing your personal statement, there are a few things that you need to make sure you know. So first and foremost, you want to make sure you know why you want to study further. Up until this point, you've been told, to go to school and do kind of whatever and do GCSEs, do A levels, and then kind of up to you now on what's next, what your next step is. Some of you may be coming back to education as well. So, you've done kind of GCSEs and A levels a while ago, done a little bit of work experience and kind of got out there in a career in a field and then coming back to education. So why are you considering coming back to that? So you want to make sure that you actually know what your reasons are for studying further. Why do you want to study your particular subject further? So kind of narrowing it down slightly, why have you chosen that particular subject area of all the choices that are available to you? There's around 50,000 courses available in the UK and you're only choosing 5. So, how have you narrowed down that search and how, what is it about those 5 courses that are really kind of bringing you, into this and kind of trying to find a focus really for your personal statement? What type of course do you want to study? Again, really important, is it, practical, is it theoretical? Is it more essay based, is it more lab based? What do you want to get from your course? What experiences do you want to get out of your course? And then what subjects within that do you want to study? So, these courses are modular, so they're made up of multiple different modules. History, I always use history as an example. I'm a former history student. History isn't just one big subject. It's lots of little individual things that kind of make up a whole history degree or a whole history course. So, what is it within that that's really appealing to you and really attracting you to that course? And finally, the most important thing that you want to be doing when you're looking at universities, when you're looking at the options that are available to you, is making sure that you're excited about the prospect of studying that at university. In my opinion, that's the most important thing when you're doing that kind of whole research around university, is making sure they're excited and you're looking forward to studying that course. With personal statements, it's really easy to read when somebody's not really that interested or not really that passionate. So, that can't really be kind of be mimicked, that can't be made up. So you want to make sure you have a real genuine interest and a real genuine passion for what you're looking to study. So what should you include in your personal statement? What are some of the examples of things you can include? Actually, I'm going to hand over to you guys for this, and I want to hear your opinion. So what type of stuff do you think you can include in your personal statement as examples? So using the chat function, just give me a couple of answers, a couple of suggestions of some things that you may think that you could write about in your personal statement, and I'll read them out. Okay, so I'll give you maybe 30 seconds. So jot a few answers in the chat, and I'll read some of them out. Okay, so we've had some excellent suggestions and actually lots of the stuff that I'm going to cover, which is really reassuring. So we've had a work experience come up a couple of times. Yeah, so work experience, whether that's work experience that's super related to the course you're looking to study, or if that's just kind of part-time work or other kind of work experience that you've had, yeah, definitely. Independent studies, so that could be things like an EPQ or an independent research that you've done, definitely. Online courses, so MOOCs, yeah, definitely 100%. Super and extracurricular activities, yeah. And the next one here is sporting achievements as well, that kind of tie into that. So yeah, not just stuff about your academics, but things outside of your studies as well will be really important. And again, we'll go into more detail in a moment about that. Reading lists, yeah, reading lists, so things that you have read and you've engaged with, definitely. But again, this is a point that I'll make in a moment, but it's not about giving us a bibliography of everything you've kind of researched. But talking about particular things that you've picked up on, particular things, pieces of work you've engaged in will be really important. Hobbies, yeah, especially stuff that's relevant to your course, 100%, but even stuff that might not be directly relevant will be good. As what you're demonstrating with those extra activities is more general skills. Other extracurricular stuff, yeah, the rest of the stuff really is kind of extracurricular activities and experiences, which is great. So thank you very much for that, guys. As I said, it's really reassuring to see that you're kind of on the same page, even though I haven't told you kind of the stuff that I would suggest. You're kind of already there or thereabouts, which is great. It shows that you've got a good kind of level of knowledge already. So I've split this into two categories. So we've got the extra reading and research, so the academic side of things, and then the extracurricular stuff. So with that kind of academic experience, that extracurricular, the academic stuff, the extra reading and the research stuff, it's really important to demonstrate that you have a pre-existing knowledge of that subject. Now, we're not expecting you to be experts, of course. If you were experts, quite frankly, you wouldn't be coming to university. But we want to make sure that we want to see and make sure that you're engaged within that subject and you are actually kind of involved and interested in that, and you've done a bit of research already. And a few ways of really demonstrating this, and some of the stuff has come up in the chat already, as I've said. Wider reading is the most obvious example of kind of extracurricular stuff or academic stuff, extra reading stuff that you can get involved in. As I've said, we don't necessarily want to see a bibliography of all the stuff that you've read. What we would like to see is maybe one or two things that you've kind of really read and engaged with and reflected upon, and kind of hear your views on that. So saying this book said this book said this, I think this. That's kind of what we're really trying to get from that, rather than just I have read this, and this. It's great. Many times I've read on a personal statement, I've read Moby Dick, The Great Gatsby, Of Mice and Men, and the Game of Thrones books. And as a person that's reading it, I'll go, that's great. So have I. What are you trying to tell me? So you need to make sure that you're really getting that across as well. That you're, what the purpose of using these examples are. Another one is journal articles, so more up-to-date current research around kind of your area of interest. That again shows a kind of a more academic side, that you're engaged in the academic research side of things, using things like Google Scholar or JSTOR. MOOCs, so massive open online courses. People have mentioned like FutureLearn. FutureLearn's a really great platform for free courses like this. There are other, loads of places kind of online, free and paid for courses as well that you can get involved in. And again, show real interest and a real kind of a passion for that subject because you've taken the time yourself to go and do that. Taster days, whether they're virtual taster days or in-person taster days, again, show that you're kind of really engaged with that kind of university way of learning. You've kind of experienced that already. And then finally, podcasts. Podcasts are the easiest thing here. There's no excuse for on a personal statement for not seeing any of these stuff. But podcasts is like the easiest and most accessible thing to kind of include in a personal statement. All you need to do, shove your headphones in for 20 minutes, do a bit of washing up, go for a walk, and take in a bit of information, and you can write and reflect about that. So there's lots of different options, different levels of kind of accessibility, and kind of what you really need as well. And we're not expecting necessarily to see all of these examples. We don't want to see necessarily one book, one journal article, one MOOC, one taster day, and one podcast you listen to. Pick and choose maybe one or two of these things. As we said, maybe two books that you're going to compare and contrast, or a book and a podcast, or a taster day and a journal article, or whatever that is. Pick and choose. Don't necessarily have to feel like you have to tick all of these boxes. And ultimately, it's down to kind of what you've actually engaged with as well, what you've actually kind of got involved in, and what you've actually been able to reflect upon. Moving kind of on to the second one is kind of the extracurricular activities. So again, some of these have been mentioned already in the chat, and kind of again they kind of have a lot more to them other than just being related to your subject. So the first thing to say is with courses such as medicine and veterinary sciences, something like work experience might be really important. Obviously, with the current pandemic and kind of it's been going on for the last 14 months or so, some universities have loosened up on their entry requirements and a requirement for work experience. But my recommendation is to check that out with the particular providers and the particular universities that you're applying to. But anyway, work experience in any form will come in really handy for these kind of subject areas and really elevate you amongst other students. But every UCAS application will benefit from wider interest outside of your A-levels anyway. So whether that is work experience is a great example, and I'll say a bit more about that in a second. But other things, hobbies and that type of stuff as well, really show kind of, again, a bit more personality, a bit more about you, and also the skills that you demonstrate. With the work experience, it shows, and these other activities, it shows that you're able to function outside of a school environment, which is vitally important because you're moving kind of away from that school environment into higher education, which is far more independent, far more you have to be more self-motivated, etc., etc. So it's important to show those transferable skills. But if you are interested in kind of work experience, that type of stuff, have a look online, contact local businesses and stuff like that, and check out local, shadowing opportunities and work experience placements and stuff like that. Some are still taking place online, even though they haven't been able to necessarily take place in person. But other extracurricular activities we can talk about in personal statements, things like music. So if you're a part of a band or a choir, or you play an instrument, it's a good way of demonstrating some of these key transferable skills. Other hobbies, so like arts and drama and theatre, drawing, painting, anything that you can really, gaming, anything you can really kind of think of really, that's kind of not covered by these other areas, might come under hobbies. And again, it shows transferable skills, especially if they're kind of organised hobbies. Sports, both individual and team sports, again shows some really great skills, communication, leadership, teamwork, that type of stuff can really be covered within the sports kind of examples, and very common that students talk about that. Travel is obviously a little bit of an awkward one to discuss at the moment. Over the last kind of, I said like 14 months, nobody's really been able to travel, but you may have been able to travel before, or you may be aiming to take a gap year and go traveling in that. So that's again shows independence, organisation, time management, all that type of stuff. And finally, work and volunteering. So work experience we've kind of talked about, but part-time work as well can come in here really handy. And things like a Duke of Edinburgh, National Citizen Service, that type of stuff from the volunteering perspective is great as well. So how do you structure your personal statement? So we kind of talked about the content and what it is, but how do you actually kind of put that together into one piece of writing? So first and foremost, we suggest that you balance it in this way. So you have 70% academic and 30% non-academic. So in the academic section, you're going to be talking about why you've chosen that subject. So why you've chosen that subject for a particular reason that we've discussed, what particular interests you about that subject, where that interest come from, and what independent reading and research you've done. So that's really the why, the what's, the where's around your academic kind of choice that you've made. And that's kind of going to come in that 70% of or that bulk of your personal statement is going to be covered by that type of stuff. Extracurricular stuff is going to be the other skills and experiences you've had. So some of your hobbies and interests and things you do in your free time might be super related to your course, which is excellent. However, lots of the stuff probably won't be, or might not directly be related, or you might not think it's related. But actually what we're trying to look here for is stuff like transferable skills, things that are going to really come in handy for you as a student more generally, but also on your course particularly. So don't worry if you're thinking, how can I tie in netball to studying chemistry? There's lots of skills within playing netball, as an example, that are going to be really handy to study chemistry or kind of be a university kind of student. So don't worry too much about that. And kind of in here, like we just talked about, work experience, extracurricular activities, unrelated activities, and kind of quotation marks, I guess, and career aspirations, which you might actually prefer to include maybe in your conclusion. And kind of one structure that I'll kind of recommend, the flow structure, kind of really simple and easy to follow and really easy to plan for as well. And that's something I haven't actually talked too much about in this session, or won't talk too much about in the session, is planning and the importance of the planning process. Like with any good piece of academic writing, you need to make sure that you have a really solid, strong plan. And the good thing about the flow structure is that it really lends itself to a plan. You can use the flow structure and do bullet points for things that you might include or examples of things you have, and then basically move that over into prose or a general piece of writing. But the flow structure, as I said, really easy to follow. So part one is your introduction. So this is where you're going to talk about where your interest in that course has come from and why you want to study that at degree level. So this is going to be really that personal thing, where that kind of personal inspiration, I guess, has come from for studying that course. Part two is going to be your academic stuff, like we've just talked about. So how your A levels linked to your chosen choice, independent reading, that type of stuff is going to come in there. Part three is your extracurricular activities. So the stuff that we've just talked about, things you do in your free time, your sports, your hobbies, your music, that type of stuff. And finally, the conclusion. So this is going to include your career aspirations, and then maybe a line about kind of how great you are and how you've demonstrated how amazing you are in your personal statement. One of my real pet peeves, to be honest with you, on personal statements is students not including a conclusion. So like with any good piece of academic writing you're doing, it needs to have a very strong conclusion and a very strong introduction, or the other way around, a very strong introduction and a very strong conclusion. The introduction may be a little bit lengthier than the conclusion. The conclusion really only needs to be maybe 2 or 3 sentences, but make sure you have it there to really tie the piece together. And as we've said, the kind of the 70% and the 30% there, as you can see. A good technique of kind of explaining yourself, because you don't have too much space. 4,000 characters is maybe 600 words, 650 words if you use short words, I guess. But it's really important to make sure that you're still giving a good level of detail. So using the STAR technique is a really good way of demonstrating that. You may already come across the STAR technique through your studies, or you may be more familiar with something like P or PEAL or the ABC method. But we usually recommend STAR because it kind of really breaks it down in a little bit more granular detail. And kind of STAR stands for situation. So the situation is basically, with any example, you're going to be setting the context, as we see here. So this student's applying for English. They're setting the context of kind of what they're going to be talking about in this example. T stands for task. So this is what they've set themselves. This is what they've gone around doing. So they've kind of said what their situation is. They then said what they're actually going to do. What their task is, what they are going to show you basically. A is for action, and this is kind of what they actually did. So this is a little bit more in detail. The task is a bit vaguer. I'm going to look at this, or I'm going to do a bit more research into this, and the action is the actual research that they did, and kind of what they read or watched or whatever. And then R is result. So kind of what happened as a result of this, tying it back to the course. So this person's read this book about this author they're really interested in, and this has enhanced their knowledge about this particular area of their study. So with any example, it's really important to be using something like STAR to make sure you're getting enough detail there, and kind of not necessarily missing things out. But also it's a good way of sort of keeping straight onto what you're going to be actually talking about. and not kind of going off in a tangent, which can be also quite easy to do in a piece of writing like this. The other way of doing this is called the so what test, and this is more kind of what through the editing process, or what I would suggest doing through the editing process. So it's an alternative, but you can use it in conjunction. And this is basically going through your writing and picking out each sentence and basically asking, so what? So we've got an example here. So at the weekends, I play football and I captain my local team. Okay. If I read this on a personal statement, I'll be thinking, okay, so what? Why do I care? What's the point? This has enabled me to develop skills in coaching, leadership, and communication. Again, better, but again, there's no kind of linking here. So what? Final line, all of the skills will be useful as an undergraduate student, and I'm keen to continue playing football at university. Much better, brings that background together. So individually, these things might not work individually, but together it's a well-explained example. So when you're doing that editing, really you want to be going through it with a fine-tooth comb saying, what's the point of this sentence? What's the point of this sentence? What's the point of this sentence? A little bit kind of in more detail about the rules. And again, we've kind of talked about the limits and stuff, but kind of what does that actually mean? What do we mean by character? What do we mean by lines? You know, what is actually what we're saying? So as we've said, UCAS has a limit of 4,000 characters and 47 lines. There is no way you can go above this. You need to make sure you're below this level. The character limit includes apostrophe, spaces, any other special characters. Basically, anything you type on your keyboard is going to be counted as a character. So kind of bear that in mind. It's not 4,000 words, it's 4,000 characters. Line limits includes blank paragraphs. So it doesn't mean that you need to write in kind of one big bulk. You still want to make sure you have paragraphs and kind of line breaks and stuff. But every line counts, whether you've got writing on it or not. Anything over this limit is lost, and that's why you need to stick below this kind of limit. There's no way of getting around that, I'm afraid. You don't upload your personal statement, you know, like as a Word document or a PDF. You copy and paste it into UCAS, and UCAS will then cut you off, you know, mid-paragraph, mid-sentence, mid-word, whatever it is, whatever you are over the limit, they'll cut you off. So it's quite brutal. You need to make sure that you're sticking within these limits. And it is possible to write a good personal statement within these limits. You know, students do it all the time, but what it does, it teaches you to be concise, but also give enough detail. Find that balance. It's going to become so important at university. When you're at university, you're going to have essays that are 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, maybe even 10,000 words for dissertations, and you're going to have to stick within those limits. So this is really good practice for that. Other things to be aware of is plagiarism. So plagiarism is, you know, the act of copying someone else's work or copying your own work. And kind of claiming as your own free original thought, basically. So plagiarism in the form of copying someone else's work is more common. So, you know, going on to, I don't know, a dodgy website, copy and pasting a personal statement and then presenting it, that would be plagiarism. Self-plagiarism, if you've applied to university before, can't use your previous personal statement because that's self-plagiarism. That's already in the system. You can't go back and use something you've already written and submitted. It's a thing with university as well. You can't go back and include something you've already written for a previous assignment. And UCAS has very strict plagiarism software. UCAS has been going for around 30 years. So they've got a really big database of all of these things, of all these personal statements. So it's really important that yours is unique. Basically, your personal statement will be run through a plagiarism software to make sure that it is original thought. There are obviously going to be similarities, you know, writing, I really love history because it's going to come up on lots of personal statements for history courses, obviously. But there is a certain level of plagiarism that's detected that is kind of peculiar or noticeable, basically. If plagiarism is detected, this information is then passed on to the universities, who more often than not do their own kind of mini investigations. And if plagiarism is found to have taken place, or they suspect plagiarism has taken place, they'll void your application. And then there's obviously major repercussions with your school or college as well. And then in 2007, just to give you an idea that these things do actually happen. And I know this is a little while ago, but you know, it still happened. Plagiarism detectors found 234 personal statements for medicine that contain the same anecdote. So this burning a hole in pajamas at age 8. So I highly doubt that happened to 234 students at the same age. It would be very, very coincidental if it did. So this is obviously being copied and pasted from somewhere on the web or whatever. So it's, again, important to have that free thought and put that across in your own writing. And a few tips to kind of check in your personal statement, then I'll wrap up with a few of my general kind of tips as well. First and foremost, try reading it out loud or aloud. That's really a great way of kind of seeing where you have mistakes, where you have long sentences, where things don't quite flow or structure well. You know, if you can handle it, read it in the mirror. I personally would cringe too much, I think, reading to myself in the mirror. But you know, whether that's just, you know, just whatever it is, mumbling under your breath. Just reading your personal statement out loud can actually be a really good way of identifying any issues with like spelling, grammar, I said flow, structure, Long sentences is the best thing for this. I do it with students all the time when I read through their personal statements in a one-to-one setting. If there's a long sentence, I'll try reading it out loud and more often not run out of breath. So you know that you're going to kind of, if you read it out loud, you kind of know the limits of that. Utilize teachers, friends, family members. I suggest using 2 people, one person to check your content and one person to check like your spelling, your grammar, and your structure. This way you're kind of covering the 2 key kind of areas of a personal statement, but also you're not getting feedback from loads of different people. I would suggest leaning away from giving it to maybe like 5 or 6 free people or whatever to look at, because you're going to get conflicting feedback and it's going to make you more confused on kind of what's right and what's not. Use spell check, but don't always trust it. Obviously, if you're using kind of like Word document and you have the US dictionary, that's going to come up with US spellings of words, which we don't want. So make sure that you are going back through and checking those kind of incidences, but also spell check doesn't always pick up on things like that as well. So you still need to go and do your own proof checking. Make sure you check names, dates, and technical languages. Somebody that is an expert within this area may read your personal statement. So if you've got something like a big sort of, I don't know, piece of technical language wrong or a name or a date wrong, that's not great. That doesn't really put you in a great light. You may also be the person that's reading your personal statement might be the person that you've name checked, and they're not going to be best pleased if you've name checked them wrong or you kind of include their research wrong. You may think that never happens, but I promise you it does happen, unfortunately. And finally, or almost finally, keep checking even when you're sick of it. You will really thank yourself if you have checked it that one extra time than you think you need to before submitting it, if that is the difference between you getting a place at your dream university and not. There is a time to just stop. I usually suggest to students to do maybe 5 or 6 drafts of a personal statement, but that number's arbitrary in some extent because some students may start with a draft that's 4 pages long and have to narrow that down. So it really depends on you as an individual. But I said, if you feel like you're done, read it one more time and then finish. Done. And you can rest easy on that. And very finally, of course, check your spelling, your grammar, and your punctuation. This needs to be perfect. It's a really small error that you can make that does make a big difference. So before we go to your questions and we start answering those, with the student ambassadors start answering those as well, a few personal statement top tips, just recapping kind of what I've talked about as well. So make sure you explain why you want to study the course, kind of, talk about where that interest and passions come from, those what, wheres, and whys. Explain why you're right for the course as well. What are your personal qualities, the skills that you possess already that are going to really help you on that course. So what you've done outside of the classroom and how that's relevant. So, that extracurricular activities that might not be completely related to your course, why are they relevant? What skills did you demonstrate? How's your chosen career related to your course? Some of you may have a vague idea of what you want to do in the future. Some of you may have no idea. Some of you may have a really sure idea of exactly what you want to do. Whichever camp you're sitting in, don't worry too much about it. If you know exactly what you want to do in the future, say you know exactly what you want to do in the future. If you have no idea, but you maybe might think about working with children or working with adults or working with animals or working in finance or working in education or whatever that is, write that. Be as vague as you want. The university is not going to come back to you in 10 years time and say, well, actually you wrote this on your personal statement 10 years ago and you haven't actually done that career, so we're actually going to take your degree away from you. That's not going to happen. It just shows that you had some thoughts about what you actually want to do in the future, and you have had future thoughts beyond university. So it's good to kind of include that information. Make sure it's easy to read. Of course, people that are going to be reading these, the admission specialists that read these may read 30, 40 personal statements a day. So you want to make sure that it is easy to follow. Start strong. This is a persuasive piece of writing at the end of the day, so you want to make sure that you're enticing the reader to want to read on further. A very quick anecdote. The best personal statement start that I think I've ever read started with a quote, and usually I'm not really a big fan of quotes. I don't like them in personal statements. You only get 4,000 characters, so don't give any of your characters over to someone else's words. Write your own. But in this instance, I kind of let it slide because this quote started, and it was the first line of this personal statement, and it said, "And then he was dead." I had no idea what was going on. I, for a moment, thought that I was going to die and this person was going to kill me and they were confessing to murder. They weren't, thankfully. And I very quickly realized that and kind of thought, okay, well, what are they applying for? Why have they included this quote? Where has this quote come from? What is this quote, what's it about? But the fundamental thing was that I wanted to read on to find out. I wanted to know exactly why they'd included that. And this student was actually applying for history. And he was really interested in succession of kings and queens and stuff like that, and about Henry VIII and stuff like that. So this is kind of where that came from. And I'm not necessarily advocating and encouraging you guys to start with a quote as strong as "and then he was dead" or anything like that. But make sure that opening line is really enticing, really snappy, really gets the person wanting to read on further. And that's kind of a real key here. Let your personality in. Obviously, this is a formal piece of writing, so I don't recommend writing jokes because A, you might not be very funny, or B, the person at the other end that's reading it might not have a sense of humor. So avoid that, but still kind of let your personality and, talk about, write in a way that you would write naturally, which is number 8 here. Write in that way, kind of in how you would normally write. Don't feel like you have to pretend to be someone else writing. Remember the STAR technique, so situation, task, action, result, when you're explaining your examples. And finally, and probably the most important advice that I can give you is personal and statement. So the title of what you're actually doing. So remember this, the personal stands for, it needs to be about you. You need to be talking about your experiences, your interests, your passions, where they come from, what they are, and what you want to do in the future. Not anybody else's, just you, your own personal kind of perspective on this. And statement, you want to make a statement, you want to make a point, you want to make sure that the university is left with a really good impression of you, and it shows that you're interesting, you're passionate, you're going to be well engaged as a student, you're going to be really easy to teach because of that. So personal and statement are kind of the 2 key things to remember. Okay, so I've talked for plenty of time, long enough. I'm now going to get our student ambassadors to put their cameras on, if that's okay, and I'm going to put mine back on as well. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to hand over to you guys to answer your questions. So the things that you've asked beforehand, or the things that you've asked, you're going to ask in the chat. So if you have pre-submitted a question when you've kind of signed up for the webinar, that's fine. I have them all here, so I'll kind of refer to them. But if you have, off the back of this, have thought, actually I want to ask this, or this was interesting, or whatever, please pop it in the chat now. What I'm going to do before we get started, I'm going to get you guys to introduce yourselves, if that's okay. So if you can just tell me what you're studying and what year you're in. So we'll start with Zara, if that's okay. Oh, you're on mute right now. Give me 1 second. I'll unmute you. You wouldn't have thought we've been doing this for like, I don't know, however long we have. Give me 1 second, and I'll unmute you both so you can.
I think, is that okay?
Yep, perfect.
Amazing. So I'm Zara. I am a 2nd year student reading in modern and contemporary history at Royal Holloway. A little bit about me and sort of my application process. When I first started looking at universities, I actually was looking at fashion journalism. I was a fashion student for 5 years, but there was the nerdy side of me that eventually went on to do history. Royal Holloway is the first university that I visited, and I fell in love with the course and the place itself. And so that kind of solved my problem for me. I chose history, and I applied to 5 universities and got 3 unconditionals and 2 conditionals. And actually the reason that I went into history is because I want to do politics. I work in politics alongside my degree now, and a lot of that application process I had to tailor to sort of show the admissions officers that the reason I want to do this is for my career. I'm glad it worked, but it was a bit of a risk there. But yeah, that's a bit about me.
Excellent, thank you very much. And sure, I'm just going to unmute you. Hopefully, there we go. You should be unmuted.
Right, is that working?
Perfect, yeah.
Nice. So hi, I'm Shaw. I'm a 1st year computer science student studying not just computer science, but computer science and AI. I applied to all 5 of our unis, got my options and my choices from all 5 unis. And in terms of applying for computer science, is actually a little bit strange. So I had a very strong passion for psychology and mental health. And I work with mental health services in London as well to provide some support for different children in boroughs. But when I wanted to apply for computer science, I had to think to myself, do I want to apply for computer science, the degree itself, or do I want to apply for computer science to apply it to other things? So that's kind of what I did. So I decided to go down the route of AI paired with like medicine and psychiatry. So my personal statement was quite something, because you'd be reading it and you'd be quite confused as to whether I'm studying chemistry, psychology, psychiatry, or computer science. But it worked in the end, and now here I am. So yeah.
Excellent. So thank you very much for coming along today, guys, and kind of giving us an outline of who you are and kind of your journey, I guess, to where you are now. So we'll start with one of the pre-submitted questions. So how can you effectively apply for several competitive courses of the same subject through one statement? So kind of to make it a little bit broader, how can you kind of put yourself across in the way where you've got 5 different courses that are going to teach 5 different things, but you want to make sure that you're being as competitive as possible for each of those courses. So how would you recommend kind of going around doing that? So if we start with Zara, that's okay.
Yeah, I think the person that wrote this said law, I think, is their example. And I would say, just to work on what Jim said, don't be too specific. Don't mention the university by name or anything. Universities can't tell which other universities you apply to, which is a good thing, because I think that used to be the case back in the day. Instead, find skills that you need for the degree in general, for a law degree in general. You'll need critical thinking and things like that, and find those skills and apply that. So don't be too specific. Provide examples of certain things. There might be similarities between these courses. They might have the same modules. So pick on those things and try and just be broad enough to think about, law as a subject and a career in law. And what you want to do with it, rather than try to pinpoint these exact courses.
Wonderful. And sure, anything to add to that?
No, I agree. The whole thing about making sure you look at those 5 choices you put down and just try and see the similarity between each of those modules. Just either write it down on a mind map or something like that, just so you have it in the back of your head. And then using the actual skills of law in general in your personal statement. That way it's still competitive and you haven't kind of just gone for a certain number of unis, you've gone for law as a whole.
The really good thing as well with law is that, especially for the LLB accreditation, there are certain modules that you have to do. So kind of with this particular example, you're going to have to do criminal law as a module if you're applying for all LLB courses. So there should be a good way of kind of trying to tie that in together, and I completely agree with what you both said. So how did you stand out to the admissions officers? So if I can get you guys to kind of think back to your personal statements, how did you put yourself across to kind of really try and stand out to them? We'll start with Shaw today, if that's okay, or now today.
Okay, so how I stood out. Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that my personal statement was quite a confusing one to read. So I wrote it as though I wrote a speech almost. So my intro is quite out there. If I was standing on a podium, you would imagine me saying my personal statement out loud. And I gave quite a lot of examples that weren't the standard examples. So I had included examples like working with research or working in like mental health services, or giving just my own general opinions on certain things that are in my field and then justifying what I've done. So I guess in a sense, what I kind of tried to do was I tried to see if I could get the person reading my statement to either agree or disagree with some of the stuff I'm saying, but then understand where I'm coming from, so that they're then more intrigued by my personal statement and they want to carry on and try and figure out where I actually stand on certain topics. But yeah.
Really interesting take. I like the idea of writing it as a speech. I think that's really clever. I think that's a really good kind of way of looking at it, especially if your kind of skills are, if you're a better speaker than say you are a writer. Actually, that's a really great way of looking at it. Zara, any kind of what kind of helped you kind of stand out, do you think?
Yeah, sure, that's really cool. I'm gonna start using that when I have to write things. I would say make it personal. I think in my, I was applying to history, and to try and have a strong opening, I thought back to a time when I wanted to do history, and I think I chose when I visited the Anne Frank house for the first time. That might be a common one for people, especially in history. A lot of people put Auschwitz and visits and school trips on theirs. But it shows that when you were younger, you had a bit of a personal connection with it. I also put a lot of stuff about how I felt about Brexit and Trump and things like that. My take on life as I saw it, basically, and my take on history. So I would say make it really personal to you. What have you done that other people might not have done? And I think one of the only silver linings about COVID is you can do so much from your laptop. You can go to so many events. I currently have a job in America. I don't work in America. I live here in England, but you'll catch me in New York on my screen. So you can do so many things. Look for things that you're interested in. For me, for politics, I went and I saw that John Bercow, who was the Speaker of the House at the time, was speaking at Newcastle University. So I went to see him, and it was free. There are loads and loads of events that you can find online that are free. All you have to do is sign up to Eventbrite or something like that, and go to a talk, and that'll just give you a bit of an edge and show that you've done something. And you can literally do it from your bed at the end of the day.
Excellent. Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with the advice you're given. Just as a quick Royal Holloway plug, you mentioned John Burko. He now works at Royal Holloway. I'm just gonna throw that out there for that purpose. But yeah, no, excellent, brilliant. So somebody's asked about Oxbridge. So did either of you apply to Oxford or Cambridge, just out of interest? Sure. Did you? No, that's fine. Okay, I'm happy. I didn't either. But from this, I'm happy to answer it. So if you apply to Oxbridge and you only do a one-liner on your personal statement regarding hobbies and interests, how does that work with the 70-30 split? Will it be okay to accept a personal statement with 90% academia, supercurriculars, and work experience? It's a really hard one. Again, not working at Oxford or Cambridge and not reading statements for students that are applying to Oxford or Cambridge, I can only give you advice from what I infer from having spoken to colleagues and having spoken to students that were considering applying to Oxford or Cambridge. So from what I've kind of taken from that, the big key thing is that Oxford and Cambridge are looking for rounded students. They're going to get hundreds of applications from geniuses, like academic geniuses, and I'm sure if you're applying to Oxford, Cambridge, you're also an academic genius, but what they're going to have that's going to make you stand out is actually you as a human being as well, and kind of those personal things that we've already heard, you know, from the answers that we've had, is actually standing out you as a person, that personality side of things. So when it comes to the balance, usually we recommend 70-30 or 75-25. With Oxford and Cambridge, I probably usually would go more towards like 80-20, 85-15. Because you know you will have supercurriculars which will kind of cover a little bit with your extracurricular stuff, but don't feel like you can't mention that you're grade 8 at an instrument, or that you have represented your county at sport, or you know you've done a bit of work experience at a care home, or you know don't feel like you can't mention that, and that it needs to be really focused, because as long as you're really picking out the key skills within that, that's the most important thing there. So yeah, don't feel like you can't talk about yourself and you need to really just be talking about your academic stuff. Still give yourself a bit of space to talk about yourself, because that's going to be important. Also, obviously, if you're applying to Oxford or Cambridge, you probably want to go to Oxford or Cambridge, but ultimately, you're also applying to 4 other universities as well. So it's important as well that they see, again, what they kind of expect to see on a personal statement. Okay, so one of the things that students really struggle on, or from my experience really struggle on, is actually beginning their personal statement. What kind of advice would you guys have, do you think, on kind of getting started with not necessarily just the writing, but kind of just the whole process, I guess, of kind of thinking about what to write? Either of you want to start?
Yeah, so ask yourself these questions. Why do I want to study this? Why, you know, what do I want to do in the future? And you don't have to be 100% sure. I had like an inkling about politics at the time, but even I wouldn't expect to be where I am now through that. And, you know, people's lives will change so much. My mum's had like 4 different careers. But think about what you want to do. You know, I really enjoy learning. I really love being able to be at a place and learn so much. So what do you want to learn? Like, what do you want to get out of it? And also, how do you think you'll contribute to these places? So basically, ask yourself these questions and just bullet point things, or mind map. Oh, I really like this. I really want to learn this. I would really be, you know, a career here sounds cool. It doesn't have to be anything solid that, you know, you're going to rely on 5-10 years later, but just to give yourself that spark of inspiration, and maybe even just go out and either look at the courses and things and see what people are doing afterwards. You can get sort of stats as well from courses to see where people have gone on and what they've gone on to do. So yeah, look at websites, look at career pages, and just see if any of those give you a little spark, I guess.
Perfect. Sure.
I would say, from my own personal experience, like workshops that I've been in, they always kind of recommended to me to start with your main body and get your A-levels, right? List the A-levels you've done on paper, and then list the topics within the A-levels that you particularly like, and then try and create yourself some bullet points. It's like, oh, you know, why do you like this? What's some further reading you could do on this? Is there any particular aspect of your A-levels that you could see yourself doing in the future? Because those will end up becoming talking points for certain paragraphs. And then once you've kind of done that, you can now start, I would say, start thinking about some supercurriculars or extracurriculars, and then think about how those tie into your subjects in general, and then think about how they tie into you as a person. And then once you've kind of got the A levels down, you've written some extracurriculars that you do, you can now start kind of curating the main body of your personal statement, and then maybe doing a couple drafts of those. I would personally say to leave the intro or conclusion for last, because quite a few people get stuck on it. I would say just work on the main content, and then you should be fine.
Very good. Again, really good advice for both of you. Thank you very much. And I completely agree. I do really want to reiterate that point. It's something that I kind of neglect to mention in as much detail in the session or in the slides, is actually that planning process, like you both kind of suggested, is starting with those key questions and bullet pointing your answers. And that is the easiest way of actually getting something down on paper. I think, again, from my experience of working with students, they get so stressed from kind of, like you said, sure, writing that introduction rather than kind of starting with something that might be a bit easier to start with, because they kind of, you have to feel like you go through it. Start with an essay. Like, I don't know many people, or I definitely don't when I write academic work, start with my introduction. Always start with kind of that main argument, that main point. And this is an academic piece of writing, sort of, because it is reflective. But yeah, to really reiterate that point. Do either of you regret anything you wrote in your personal statement? It's okay if you don't. I do, so I'm happy to jump in if you guys haven't got any examples.
There is one thing. I guess the one thing for me would be, I had mentioned, this is one thing I figure a lot of people might do as well. So if you mention a book, please make sure you go and actually read the book you've mentioned properly, or at least the area of the book you've talked about, because it is quite difficult to waffle about a maths book when you've written that you like this particular part of the maths book, because in all honesty, I can't tell you what was in that part of the maths book. So yeah, that's one thing. But yeah, beyond that, nothing else.
Excellent. Zara, anything?
No, although I agree with Shaw, some places will want an interview. History places don't usually interview, but I got one anyway. And there is nothing worse than sitting in an interview and saying something on a CV or a personal statement that you thought sounded really good and you didn't actually know what was going on. And I'm lucky that I read the majority of the book that I mentioned. But I know a lot of people that were reading a 600-page book overnight because they had an interview at like Oxbridge the next day, and you don't want to be in that position. Just go with what you know.
Literally, you can be the best blagger in the world, but it's not going to help you, especially if you're especially in an Oxford or Cambridge interview. You're stuffed a little bit if you haven't read it. I did actually. I read my personal statement for the first time the other day. For maybe I applied to university like 10 years ago because I'm old. And I came across it the other day when preparing for a session like this, and read a little bit of it, and I didn't recognize who had written it. And this is kind of a really key point that I want to bring across, kind of at the behest of my failure, I guess. It was something like, I was talking about my extracurricular activities and said something about the stresses and strains of academic life and how they were an outlet for that. And I read that and I was like, who wrote that? Like, because I didn't write that, because I wasn't writing at that level when I was like 17, 18, and I wasn't that philosophical about anything at that age. And this comes to kind of a more broader point, and this is why I kind of really try to emphasize the personal statement aspect of it. You're not, as universities, we're not trying to see academic students in the sense that there is no archetypal type of academic student. Like, we're not looking for a particular type of student. You're all very different. You're all coming at it very differently, and you're going to all have very different opinions and ideas on things. So don't kind of feel like you have to fit a certain mold. I said I'm guilty of that. I definitely did when I wrote my personal statement, and reading through it was a cringe fest, because I could read that I could see that within that I was trying to fit this very philosophical history student that actually just doesn't exist. So learn from kind of my mistake, and write naturally, and write kind of how you want to write. So you don't want to kind of read your personal statement in 10 years time and cringe at it. Would you suggest including like personal views? So with something like this, I'll probably go to you first, Zara, because obviously the course that you're doing at the moment, history, and then with an interest in politics. Would you recommend putting across like political views, or things that may be not necessarily controversial but may divide opinion? What would your take on that be?
Yeah, as someone who works in a lot of politics, I definitely try and keep that on the down low until I know people. So, I mean, I really don't think that anyone's going to read your personal statement, and if you've come out really left wing, I don't think that that should affect your application. But I wrote about Brexit and Trump, but I wrote about it more in the fact that like these were really historically groundbreaking, and people will be speaking about it. It'll be in the textbooks in however many years' time, rather than how I felt about these things. Just you never know who you're going to come across, and people might not always agree with you. And I think one of the best things that you can learn is listening to other people. Everyone who applies will have different views to you as well. You're going to meet so many people at university who you won't get along with, like politically or whatever. But I would say focus on why these things are important rather than your personal views on them, because you might change in 5 years as well. So just be true to you and be true to I sort of like the wider context, I guess, rather than really inherent. I suppose that's just political views, but I'm not sure what else. I don't know. I was a climate striker as well at the time, so I definitely included that. I mean, you could tell by reading it what kind of person I was, but I suppose it was more about me than about my views on anything else, if that makes sense.
Yeah, perfect. And sure, you've obviously said with yours, you kind of like how you had written it was kind of you wanted them to either agree or disagree with you, but you really fundamentally wanted to see where you're coming from. Kind of have you got kind of anything to like add from that?
Okay, yeah. So because I do computer science, it's slightly different than the humanities and arts. There is quite a lot of ethics involved in computer science. So a lot of my personal statement was similar to what Zara was saying, where I might talk about, let's say, the theory of intelligence. And rather than, kind of dismiss the theory, I would instead tell the person looking at my personal statement what I think about the theory and how I think it could be applied to computer science, or where I think it stands in computer science. So in a sense, I was kind of trying to fit a view that I had on something, but then trying to adjust it so that it works in the context of the subject that I'm applying to. I guess another good example that I could give would be if you were to talk about Brexit, rather than giving your stance on Brexit, you can instead talk about how technology might get affected by Brexit for certain parts or certain things that are needed in graphic cards, for example. You know what I mean? You give your views, but not in a political sense. You just give it in a nice academic, link into your subject kind of way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, thank you very much, guys. So somebody's asked, if you take inspiration from another personal statement, so you've kind of done a little like quick Google search, found lists of personal statements and stuff like that, how do you apply that inspiration without plagiarizing? Did you either of you guys look at any personal statements before you wrote yours, or did you just kind of go in straight away? Sure, you're nodding your head. What have you got kind of how did you kind of avoid that plagiarism aspect of it, but still take inspiration from them?
So what my tutors told me to do, so they gave us about 30 to 50 personal statements to look over. So what they said, they were like, oh, get the parts of the personal statement that you like, paste it into a separate document, and then create bullet points underneath the parts that you like about why you like them. And then you can change the why you like them into your own writing, if that makes sense. Let's say I liked this one line that somebody used because it was very snappy, witty, and straight to the point, for example, with what I wanted to do. So instead of using the same kind of example, you just take the snappy, witty, straight to the point, and then use that for what you want to say, as opposed to the actual content that you're looking at.
Yeah, like that. Yeah, really, really good advice. Yeah, Zara.
Yeah, we only looked at maybe 3 or 4, I think. Nowhere near like 30 to 50, but I guess it's the kind of same thing. Never directly take someone and go like, oh, that person's got a really good example. I'm sure they won't notice if I like use it. A lot of people will have the same examples. The example of plagiarism they gave me is that these 2 twins wanted to go and do the same course, so they just put the same personal statement, thinking that I think they just wrote about the same experiences because they were twins. They'd had all the same experiences, but it got caught by the plagiarism checker. And those things are real. Since coming to uni, I've seen them. But yeah, just see what you like about them. Oh, I like that they were inspired by this moment in their life. Like, what have I been inspired about in the same way? I didn't do what they did, but I've like had the same emotions about what they're talking about, and try and fit that in. Basically exactly what Shaw said, find the why and use that instead.
Yeah, definitely. And that's an academic skill in itself that, again, you'll be kind of using at university, which is actually looking at something from a perspective, your own perspective, and identifying what's good, what's bad, and kind of appraising that. So yeah, I completely agree with both of you. Pick out what you like about it and then write it, in your own way. Somebody's asked, how do you sell yourself correctly on a personal statement? So how do you kind of put yourself across in a way that is kind of a way that or in a persuasive way, I guess, and kind of on top of that, how do you kind of, I said, like, what are kind of some of the techniques that you can use to really put yourself across in that way, but also to give enough information, but not give too much information, but not to give too little information, that type of stuff. So any kind of advice on the actual writing side of things and the language that you use, and kind of and the best way to kind of, I said, put yourself in the best position possible to really elevate what you've done.
I would draw here on confidence. I am not a very confident person. If someone compliments me, I cringe. I'm very bad at that kind of thing, but these are one of the occasions like this, like a CV, where you will just have to put the best of every situation you've ever been in into a document. Don't go over the top. Don't pretend that you are the superior in your subject. Chances are the person reading it will know more than you do, but be confident about the things that you do know and the things that you have done. Put them in a really positive light. What I did was I sort of projected the kind of person I wanted to be after I came out of uni. Alongside the kind of career thing, like who do I see myself as in a few years? Where do I want to be? And I tried to get that sort of sense, and I tried to talk as if I was that person in 5 years, and that really helped, because just sort of get on over that, like, oh, I'm really inexperienced, I don't know anything. Everyone is, and you're always learning during life. So don't let that hold you back in any way. Think about who you want to be and try and be that person in the statement.
To add on to that, I would say another way would be to kind of critically think and critically evaluate some of the things that you're saying, because I know universities like it when you do that. So if you give one example of a time you had to demonstrate leadership, evaluate yourself in that situation so that the uni can see that, oh, this person can actually evaluate themselves. They can evaluate different scenarios, because to unis, that shows them that you have kind of higher order thinking almost. And then on top of that, try your best to also use kind of the persuasive techniques you've learned in English. So one technique I saw in a couple of my peers' personal statements, and I think I used it in mine as well, was to ask a question, kind of a rhetorical question. If you use it well, it really works. You could use it at the end of, so yeah, like after you finish evaluating a piece, you could always end it with a question to kind of direct it back to the person reading it, so that they really take in what you're saying. And I think one final point on selling yourself kind of links back to what Jim said, with having a very strong intro and a very strong conclusion. You want to make sure that your doesn't last too long and it kind of ends on a nice, snappy note. So, only 1 or 2 lines. And then your introduction as well needs to be captivating in the same way you'd be writing a story in English, is what I would say personally.
Yeah, definitely. And with the conclusion thing, the example I usually give to students is saying one line about, in the future, from this degree, I would like to go on to do a job in this field. And then another sentence which basically says, as you can see from what I've written, I am amazing, and you'd be a fool not to give me an offer, full stop, or anything, something along those lines that has that kind of energy to it. And yeah, just to pick up on kind of the confidence thing that you mentioned, Zara, as well. It's really hard, I think, when you're writing something like this to not say, I think, I feel, I've been told, I may have, or whatever. It's really important that you use forceful language in the sense of, I have this, I have done this, I think this about this, and this is why. There's no kind of feel, because this is your opportunity to really put yourself across. The person that's reading it's not going to do that for you. So as like uncomfortable as it might feel, it's really important to really kind of, I said, put yourself across in that way and be really forceful with that language. So we're going to wrap up in a second. So kind of one last kind of question really to kind of tie things together. So an overall kind of tip you would give to students on writing personal statements, what kind of would be the one key thing that you would say? So the one I kind of gave in the session was the personal and the statement thing. Make sure it's personal, make sure you're making a point. What would you guys suggest being as a kind of an overall tip that you would give?
It sounds kind of silly, but in these 4,000 characters, like, you are the main character of this story, and just sell yourself that way. Like, make sure that your voice is heard in there. You're not just another person applying to another degree. This is your entire future, and the things that you go on to do are going to be so amazing. So yeah, just, write your own story, I guess I'm saying.
Nice.
And for me, I would say, as much as you sometimes really want to get under the 4,000 character limit when you're writing a draft, don't worry about it. Just write as many drafts as you can, even if they're small or if they're really long. The more drafts you have on paper, the better, because at the end of the day, when you're submitting it onto UCAS, you'll always whittle it down anyway and only pick out the best parts.
Very good. Thank you very much, guys. You've been fantastic. It's been really, really good to talk to you and kind of get your advice. And thank you guys for kind of coming along today. Just to wrap up, so I'm going to turn my camera off if you guys want to turn your cameras off and mute yourselves and stuff. But just kind of the last few minutes kind of to wrap up. So if you did want to kind of find out more from anything from today, you can check out online resources. So Royal Holloway, the schools team that I work in, have produced a wide breadth of online resources that you can access for free. So just search this link, bit.ly/rh_resources. Again, if you want to speak to more students about kind of their experiences and stuff, you can use our chat function on our website, which is bit.ly/RoyalHolloway_chat. And finally, personal statement review service. As I said kind of at the beginning, this is a free service that we offer at Royal Holloway, where we'll go through your personal statement, we'll annotate it in text, but also we'll give you general feedback and stuff. So you can kind of use that service kind of from now to application point. And that is bit.ly/PS review service. I'll try and pop all of these links in the chat as well. And if any of you were interested in getting a copy of the recording of today's session, you can do as well. And again, I'll pop the details about that in the chat. Otherwise, thank you very much again for coming along today. If you want to get prospectus for Royal Holloway, you can scan the QR code or jot down the link. And same if you want to sign up to our mailing list, the link's just there as well. The last thing that I'll ask you guys before I let you go is to fill out the evaluation form when you leave. So these sessions are quite new, the way the format that we're doing it. So we're really, really interested to hear what you thought about the sessions and kind of specifically what you thought about the session today. So again, thank you very much for coming along today. I'll pop those links in the chat for you. Okay, take care.